Let's open our Bibles to Hebrews chapter 11, verses 13 to 16. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country, and truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. Verse 16, but now they desire a better country, that is an heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. This is the second time we are looking into this passage. 2 weeks ago, when I preached from this text, I have entitled my sermon, The Faith of the Pilgrims. And we have the same title today. We thought about this topic in a very unique way because it speaks of God's people as those who live on earth not as continuing dwellers of this world, but as strangers who are ready to leave this place. If we live here as travelers, ready to depart at any time. And so we particularly noticed this statement at the beginning of verse 13 that says, these all died in faith. And I dwelt on that point quite long last time when I preached. And I said the faith of the pilgrims is a faith that is ever ready to die, to be with the Lord. It is not a faith that makes us more and more earthbound. It is a faith that cut loose our affection for this world and make us fly up toward heaven, ever ready to leave. If you recall what I said last Lord's Day, 2 weeks ago, by the way, when I preached, is this. That statement, these all died in faith, is God's epitaph on the mausoleums of the patriarchs. It is God's writing on the gravestones of God's people. They died in faith. How can you die in faith? That was the question we considered in detail. You can't die in faith if you don't live in faith. It is those who persevere all the days of their pilgrim journey on earth in faith that can have an end in faith. If you have abandoned your faith sometime in your Christian life, then of course it cannot be said of you that you have died in faith. Christians, in other words, are those who persevere in faith all the way to the end. And so it can be said of them that they all died in faith. In fact, if it cannot be said of any of us that we died in faith, there is no hope of heaven for us. And therefore, I think it must be settled in our hearts once and for all that we cannot say, I had faith for 20 years, then the last 5 years of my life, I abandoned my faith. And because I lived 20 years in faith, I may be found in heaven. No such thing. Faith perseveres. Faith endures. And faith is seen in the life of a person who, even in his death. I'm speaking this with regard to those who are truly Christians. So, this faith has certain unique characteristics, and that's what I want to address today. Let us look first of all into verse 13 and 14 once again. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. There are many things said in this particular passage, but I would like to summarize them in these words. The faith of a pilgrim is a faith that longs for a celestial country. The faith of a Christian is a faith that desires earnestly, passionately for a celestial, heavenly country. Now let's see how powerfully this is related to us. In verse 13 we are told that these who died in faith, that's a reference to the patriarchs like Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, they died in faith, having not received the promises. Now these promises, as I mentioned 3 Sundays ago, is a reference to the promises that God gave to the patriarchs concerning a land on this earth. You remember God called Abraham out and said, I will give you a land of milk and honey, and this is for your children, and your children will be like the stars of heaven. But of course, when Abraham died, he didn't have all his descendants like the stars of heaven. He had only one promised seed, that was Isaac. And even Isaac didn't have the opportunity to see that all his children were so many. He had only 2, Esau and Jacob, of which only Jacob was chosen. And even then we know that both Abraham and Isaac and even Jacob could not occupy the promised land to the fullest. Abraham came to that land, but he was like a nomad, constantly moving up and down the land. And then God said to him in Genesis 15 that soon his children will be slaves in a foreign land, namely Egypt. And they will be there for 400 years. And that was fulfilled in the time of Jacob. Because of the famine, Jacob had to move his entire family to Egypt, where Joseph, his second last son, was under Pharaoh. And since then they were in Egypt for 400 over years. So you see, the patriarchs did not see the fulfillment of the promise that God has given with regard to this world. But they believed all these things will happen in God's appointed time. They never doubted it. But you see, in order to express their faith concerning what God has promised, they had to take certain steps. When they took those steps in faith, they did not desire to see everything being fulfilled in their time. They knew God has His time. But they need to take that step of faith according to what God said. So when God said to Abraham, come out of the land of your fathers, he just moved out. He didn't wait. He didn't say, wait until your time arrives. No, just go and do it. We thank God for many Christians who did the same in their life. We know of missionaries who went into countries and, tribal areas where nobody ever went to preach the gospel, but only to be killed as soon as they entered the place. And you may wonder, why did they go? Why did the Lord send them? If God had a plan to reach out to these people, why didn't He let the missionaries live there for many years and preach the word and have a church? Why did God's providence allow them to be killed as soon as they entered the land? But you see, their going and dying there was God's plan to revive a great number of people to go there later. And also, God providentially moved the heart of the locals so that they might sympathetically think about the other missionaries who are coming. Now, we can't interpret everything that happens according to God's plan. One may question what wisdom was there for God, having promised the land of the Canaanites, sending Jacob and his sons to live in Egypt for 400 years. Now, if you question me, there is no way I'm going to give you an answer. I also don't know. Let God be the interpreter of His providence. We have a part to play. And our part is this: act by faith. And that's all. Act by faith. Now, to act by faith, you must, as I said, lift your eyes from the earthly plane of our life to the celestial plane. You cannot live on this earth thinking everything in terms of this terrestrial globe. We got to find meaning and purpose in a heavenly view. Otherwise, it makes no sense. A mother might ask, Lord, you help me to conceive a baby. And I carried this baby for 6 months. And then the baby died in my womb. What is this? Or you may bring up a child, and this child is 2 or 3 years old and gets into an accident and dies. And you question God, what is it all about? Here is a young couple who is about to get married. They prayed for one another. Everything seems to be God's will. They are engaged now. They are looking for the day of the marriage. And one of them dies in an accident or comes down with some incurable disease. And you wonder, what is it? You see, if you are going to look at all these difficult aspects of life, the trials that God's providence would send to us, in an earthly level, all these make no sense. And you get very frustrated, you get very troubled, and you feel God is a failure, or God has failed me, or that God has abandoned me. That's not the case. All of these patriarchs, when they lived on this earth, suffered great tests and trials. You remember, God even asked Abraham to take Isaac to sacrifice. Do you remember that? And that is the only child whom God promised. It could, God would bring about all the promises through Isaac, not through Ishmael. And God asked Abraham to bring that child in sacrifice. You know what Abraham believed? That God can raise him up. Even if I would kill him for God's sake, well, God knows how to bring him alive. So I'm not unwilling to do that which God has asked me to do. I will sacrifice my son. God will see to it. You see, the point is this. We are given plenty of promises on this earth. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. And that you may find a period of life where you have great need in life. You may be struggling to make your ends meet. And you may wonder, Lord, I loved you, I'm serving you. Why this problem like this? Why is that I find it very difficult to buy my daily meal? Why is it not there? Or you may find yourself having sickness. You want to serve God. You want to give your full energy into it. You have been doing the same. You've been giving your entire life with all your strength. You have been serving the Lord. And suddenly you find yourself crippled by terrible disease. How am I going to serve God? Questions. Didn't the Lord say He would heal? Didn't God say that He will be our strength? Didn't He say that no evil shall betide thee? What is this? Now I can tell you something. We still believe in His promises. Why? Because we know whatever God has promised will be ours in the time that God has allocated to us, according to His wisdom. And there will be a period in my life where I, by God's providence alone, will be incapacitated from doing that I would like to do for Him. But that's His plan. My life is not mine. It is for Him to design. It is for Him to plan. It is not what I want to live, but it is what He wants to live. So if God has a plan for me, and if He has promised certain things, and He will fulfill them in that period of time. In Abraham's case, the Lord did help him to journey from his father's land of Ur all the way to the promised land. And in that land, when he reached there, even though he did not occupy every corner of that land, yet God has given him whatever he needed. Because of lack of faith, sometimes that crept into Abraham's life, Abraham wandered here and there, even to Egypt. But the Lord protected him, delivered him from trouble, and brought him back. And you see that the difficulty in all this is this. We find ourselves becoming very worried when things don't seem to go the way we would like it to be. We tend to think that God has somehow withdrew Himself from helping us. So occasionally we behave like Abraham, who wandered into Egypt because there was a famine in the promised land. But because Abraham went into Egypt, he almost lost his wife. Don't forget it. What you must do, dear friend, is this. Now believe this. All right? Even though you have made some mistakes in life, now believe this. In your situation, no matter how tough it be, God has a plan to bring you finally home. And because He has saved you to the uttermost, because He has given you the hope of heaven, there is no way He is going to abandon you halfway through this journey. He will safely bring you to the other side. Don't worry about the fulfillment of the promises concerning this life. God will do that. He will never fail. You don't try to stand there and argue with God and try to teach Him what is better. He knows what is best for me and you. He knows. So let's be calm and know who God is and fix our eyes not on this earth issues, but on celestial hope that God has given. Keep looking heavenward. Always look upward. And let's see how this has been practiced by the patriarchs. Look again into verse 13. So not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off. Some of these things are future, as far as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are concerned, so they look forward. So God said He will do it. God said He would do it. We have nothing to worry. We just look forward. And then, we're persuaded of them. Persuaded, convinced of them. They were deeply convicted that God will fulfill all that He has said. There's nothing to worry. But I was communicating with a young Christian who is going through some difficulties. And when I got the reply, I was so happy. Say, I'm not troubled, I'm not frustrated. I know the Lord is with me, and He has given me the strength. Simple statement, but very comforting. Because when you see a Christian going through an ordeal, you worry for that person, whether the person can hold on to. Because even watching the struggles of people is very difficult. But if you see that in that person who is going through the trial, a strong persuasion in the heart that God is with me, He has promised that. And no matter what happens, He will never leave me. You see, dear friends, that is the hope of a pilgrim. That is faith. Is that persuasion about God and His promises. It is not about what is happening to me now. It is not about, what are the trials that I have to go through. None of these things. It is that persuasion, that conviction, that deep-seated assurance that my Lord has promised He will fulfill it. What great joy. What great conviction. And here we go. Again, in verse 13 it says, they embraced them. They embraced the promises that God has given. Not only persuaded, convicted, but embraced them. Sometimes we are very convicted about a promise that God made. We are very convinced that the Lord would forgive us, the Lord will not abandon us, the Lord has promised everything. But occasionally, because of trials, we are forced to forget or even doubt those promises. Convictions have to be constantly renewed. Convictions have to be constantly nurtured. Convictions has to be constantly strengthened. And in order to do that, you need to constantly embrace the promises of God. You got to say, I'm not going to give up my faith in the Lord. He said He will see me through. The Lord will help me. In my sickness, in my troubles, and I sometimes feel very depressed. And I tell you why I feel depressed. Not that I have no faith, but sometimes the trial overwhelms our mind. It just eats you up because it's so real. Your pain, it's real. I was just sharing with brethren who came for adult Bible study this morning. I have diabetes, and sometimes I have to inject 2-3 times a day. And that's not an easy thing to do. Like yesterday when I was trying to inject myself, the first time I tried, I felt the pain. Unusual, it's not common. And I felt that pain, then halfway through, I can't press any more into my flesh. I released. I took it out. And I said, okay, try again. Second time, I felt the same pain. And I said, oh, that's not good. And I'm hesitating the third time to inject myself. I tried again. I prayed to the Lord and tried again. This time it worked. And after that, I sit down and I felt very depressed. Why this thing? I have to go through this. And suddenly I find my mind is plagued with a kind of gloominess, disappointment. And if I'm not careful, it can become a bitterness toward God. Why God did this? Why must He allow me to go through this? Why can't I be like any other 46-year-old man who doesn't have to do this? Why must I be like this? I felt very frustrated, but I have to stop myself at that time and take hold of His promise that He will be my strength, that He will be my joy and my comfort. I just have to put my frustration down and embrace the promises of God. And the Lord immediately reminded me of that famous incident we all know when Paul prayed in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 for the thorn in the flesh to be removed. But God said, my grace is sufficient. We embrace promises like that because there will be constant attack on our conviction. You see, dear friends, we all believe, right? By God's grace. But that faith itself will be under attack. So much so that one hymn writer wrote, I like that hymn so much, I mentioned this before. When I fear my faith will fail, Christ can hold me fast. Sometimes our faith can be assailed by the devil, and even the trials that we are in, we think, oh, I cannot continue this journey of faith. But we thank God. With weak hands, with weakened hands of faith, we still embrace Him. We don't let that promise go from our heart. We cling on to it. We embrace it. Consciously, we do that. And when we embrace, the next thing we do is that we confess. We confess. We openly testify. Our deep-seated convictions in heart would find its expression in verbal testimonies, in audible testimonies. I want to tell you this. When you are in trouble and when you take hold of God's promises because of your faith that transcends the trials that you're facing and take you all the way to heaven, you must praise the Lord who gives you that expectancy, that confidence. And you must testify the Lord's goodness. Don't keep your mouth shut. I found this a great joy in my life. Some people have misunderstood me for being so open about my struggles and the faith that God gives to me. They thought I'm trying to get sympathy from people, or I'm trying to get money out of people, or I'm trying to find an excuse for this and that. Not really. Never done that. I never begged for money. I never asked people to do anything for me because I don't want to do things. I never found excuse for myself. By God's grace, of course, I tried to keep myself active and diligent and faithful and fervent. Nonetheless, so often I have told you how horribly I felt. I just mentioned to you how I felt when I injected myself. Now, this is not to make you worry and get you to send some money to me. No, don't do that. You don't have to do it. Just because I look sad, don't send in money. That's not the way to cure my sadness. You just pray for me. That will be enough. But why do I say these things? Simply because this is how I find my joy, my strength. This is my conviction. If I don't tell you, then why am I here as a Christian? I got to tell you for your encouragement. I testify this. I confess this. You look at verse 14. It's repeatedly said there, for they that say such things declare plainly. Wow. 2 more times about our verbal confessions. We embrace, and our embracing of that promise finds its audible expression. We are not ashamed. The Lord is our God. I must say that some of us have to grow up in faith. We should worry less about what people think about us and our sufferings, and must think more about glorifying God in our trials. Really. If you have been poor because you followed God and been obedient to Him, because you gave up your job for Christ's sake and you have been poor, and never ever be ashamed to tell your congregation or your Christian friends how the Lord has sustained you. And then the Lord will be seen as the wealth of a Christian. God is my wealth. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. If you are sick, you let the people know in God's appointed time, of course, not because I said, but when the Lord gives you the grace, you let the people know how the Lord has guided you, how strong you are. When you are lying in the hospital bed, when your friends and Christians visit you, open your mouth and say to them, if you can, open your mouth. Of course, there will be a situation we cannot talk, but if you can talk, say, thank you for praying. The Lord has been good to me. He is my strength. I'm not worried. I'm not troubled. Yes, there is pain. I got some of these difficulties, but the Lord is with me. We testified. When people attack us, when people gossip and slander us, instead of being bitter and being vengeful in attacking them, we suffer them with thanksgiving and confess. Many may accuse me, but who can condemn me? The Lord has justified me. The Lord is my defender. He knows me. You know, this is joy of Christians. How else will the world know that you embrace your God? How else the world would know you have embraced what He has promised? How else the world know that you are living by faith? How else the world would know that you are dying by faith if you don't confess? Recently, a dear brother in Christ, a deacon in True Life Bible-Presbyterian Church, passed me a book. And I love this man a lot. He reads a lot of good Christian books, and he likes to donate some of those books after he finished to me. And he put some of his book in the Bible Witness book room as well. This wonderful brother, and he gave me a book called The Last Sayings of the Saints of God. This particular author has collected some of the sayings of God's people, servants of God, on their deathbed. I have not started reading it yet, but I just look at the synopsis of it on the cover page. I was already excited. You know, they have some wonderful things to say in the depth of their suffering. Oh, those are gold mines. I tell you, when you read those confessions of God's saints in their greatest suffering, your heart will fly out to God with great renewal of faith and hope. Because those words come out of a soul that is so well polished by the fiery furnace of trial. They are refined. Those confessions are without any dross. There is no impurity. They are purified confessions of God's saints, and I love to read them. We are also called to bear such a witness in this world. The words that I speak in the midst of my trials are worthy to be heard by other Christians. And it is God's design that I speak those words of faith, because it also encourages my fellow pilgrims to lift their eyes from this world to the things above. They that say such things declare plainly. I see this. Recently, one of our deacons told me, Pastor, you go through all this and your preaching is getting better. Well, I was wondering whether my preaching was bad before that. Of course not. That's not what he meant. I suppose, was I less an expositor before? I don't think so. I always work hard to expound God's word. But I think what he's trying to say is that when you find new expressions of your faith resulting from your trial, it becomes a little bit more plain. Not a little bit more, actually, a lot more plain. It becomes clearer because you speak with much deep felt understanding. It goes beyond the intellectual realm. It comes from a heart that savored the goodness of God. Oh, taste that the Lord is good. When a suffering person says that, it has a more powerful emphasis, a clearer dimension. Our faith, when it is raised from earthly pleasures to the heavenly pleasures, God does it through trials. And these trials are trying to take us away from the world, teaching us not to love the world and to lift our eyes eagerly toward heaven. And when we lift our eyes toward heaven, we become quite excited. And the noise that comes out of our soul is not so much of bitterness and complaint, but one of appreciation, thanksgiving, and hope. Trials are meant to detach us from the things of this world and to make us more heaven-minded. That's why I made a statement at the beginning of my message today. The faith that God has given to us does not make us earthly, but heavenly. And that's why we read in verse 13 at the end, and now in verse 14, that they were strangers and pilgrims on earth. There was a detachment from the present. And there was a drawing to the future hope that we have. By the way, dear friends, all our trials here teaches us that we are not a people of this world. That's why all this happened to us. So we look forward to a time of great pleasure that far exceeds the sinful pleasure of this world. Far exceeds the sinful pleasure of this world. We look forward to a land where there is no tears, no sin, no sickness, no death. Ah, what a wonderful land it will be. And when we suffer in this body, in this world, we hope for the day when there will be no more trouble. And we confess that. We take that by faith. And we feel very strange in this world. And every day become a day to look forward to that day that is nearing when we shall be with the Lord. Now let's consider verse 14 a little deeper. I'm still with that first point. I'm not going to have many points today, just two major points. Remember, this is about faith that longs for a celestial city. And verse 14 has the culmination of that point, where he says, they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. They seek. Epizeto is the Greek word which means to desire to have a deep experience of something. Seeking to experience it. Seeking to be part of it. It is not just researching. This seeking is more than doing a research in the Bible. How is heaven going to be? What it is like? What did Jesus say about heaven? But this is about knowing those things that it may be mine. That's what faith is. Faith seeks to be part of the heaven's joy. I want to make this very, very clear to you. The faith in certain people that is only good to trust God for earthly things is not a real faith. A faith that will have God only for better things of this world is not a saving faith. It is not a faith that will take you to heaven. It is the faith that takes you away from this world and more to God and His presence is the real faith. They seek for it. That's Christian faith. We are not of this world, Jesus said. You understand what does that mean? We are not of this world. We are not a worldly people. We are on our journey toward heaven. Every day on earth, we rejoice because our day to be with the Lord is nearer than yesterday. Oh, I am so happy. There are some Christians who, I believe because of their immaturity, I pray for them, that they always like to be in a better situation than what they are today. Now, it is nothing wrong to improve your life situation, but look, if God's providence have allowed certain difficult circumstances in your life, don't try to shake it off, because you may get into a bigger trouble. You got to believe some trials are there because God wants it to be like that, so that He might slowly pluck you away from the pleasures of this world and make you more heavenly minded. There are those who have trouble here in Singapore. They hope of migrating. Okay, they go Canada, they go Australia, they go here. And they think once they get there, it's a land of milk and honey. But no, dear friends. Even for Abraham, the land of Canaan was not all that friendly. He had many problems, isn't it? Even his own nephew Lot fought with his shepherd and there was so much problem. And there was famine. And that made him go to Egypt. This world is not a comfortable place for Christians. Whether you live in China or India or Singapore or Canada, let me tell you, this world is not our home. And there will be plenty of things to remind you, this is not your world. By migrating, you don't secure a better place. That's not God's promise. If you really want a migration, pray to go to heaven, where there is no trouble. By the way, I'm not against migrating, if God so wants you to do that. Because after all, we are told to go into all the world and preach the gospel. For gospel's sake, for the glory of God, you go wherever you want. There is no restriction to it. But don't try just because you want to avoid a trial. No, sir. There are more trials on the other side. The Bible doesn't say if you live as a Christian in Canada, you will have less trials. You are wrong. It's not in the Bible. My point is simply this. Wherever we live, whatever engagement God gives to us, do not just say, I exercise faith so that I may have everything going for me in this world. No. Yeah, I say, I exercise my faith that I may overcome my tribulations in this world. Jesus said, ye will have tribulation in this world. And I exercise my faith that I may overcome my tribulation in such a way that my hope will rise day after day to heaven. And the next word you have in verse 14 is this. They seek a country. You know, this word country here is a very unique word. It is found in the Gospels, and it is the Greek word patris. Patris. Now, pater means father. Patris means the land of the father. It's not just a country, a nation. It's a region from which a person originally comes. It is a region that he feels that it is his. It is where his home is. If you were to ask me, what is my patris? I will immediately tell you it's Kerala, India. Because that's where I'm from, not Singapore. You know, I'm still a PR, many of you know, permanent resident in Singapore. My wife is a Singaporean. My children are Singaporeans. And I still find it difficult to apply for Singapore citizenship. Though 2 weeks ago I said in the church prayer meeting, I've decided to apply for Singapore citizenship, I still find it very difficult. You know, it's a nice country to live. I don't have any problem with it. But it's so hard to say goodbye to the land that I grew up. Though this place is so much more comfortable in many ways. But let me tell you, I gladly will say goodbye to Kerala, India to go to heaven. That's my patris. That's my family home. That's where my soul is. That's where my heart is. We say, where your heart is, that's your home. And where is your heart? It's in heaven. We seek to be there. We seek to be back home. So when somebody dies in our church, we say, the Lord has called so-and-so home. He is called home. Yes. So if sickness come, death come our way, we don't become desperate. We say, the Lord has just sent the vehicle to fetch me. Blessed be His name. I'm on a journey straight to heaven. And now my journey to heaven will be faster because here comes the disease to take me home. And that's all. And we all know we are not going to be here on earth for long. So what if the providence of God wants us to go early? It's still fine. It is God's goodwill that we are with Him. I tell you, it is far better to be with the Lord than living in this world. It's far better, if the Lord so will. That's our homeland. That's our hometown. And we love to be there. So you see, dear friends, faith longs for a celestial country. The next important thing that we notice here is that faith actually cuts us loose from this world. It detaches us from this earthly world. Let's look at verses 15 and 16. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned. Do you notice that? Here, the writer of Hebrews tells us that if Abraham always thought about the land from which he came, his father's land, for instance, he always could have gone back to the people who worship idols, to the old traditions that he were used to, or the craft and the things they were used to. He could have gone back and be part of them. But they refused to go back. They had opportunities to go back. You remember when Abraham came, I said this several times already, to the promised land. There was a famine. He could have actually packed and gone back at that time, saying that, hey, God told me He will bring me to a land full of milk and honey. How can there be this famine? I'm going back. He could have said that. There was an opportunity. Now, opportunity suggests the idea that you are lured to do something. You are invited to do something. It is not a remote chance, but a real possibility. Even a welcoming door being opened. That's an opportunity. You know, friends, there are many reasons why a Christian can easily go back to the world, go back to the old ways. So many things. But what would keep him away from all those alluring temptations of this world? What would keep us away from the strong pull toward the world? It is our hope of heaven. Simply that. We have many opportunities, but we find ourselves being pulled by our faith that is in Christ Jesus, which is anchored in the hope that He gives. We say bye to those things in the world. This is not only the case of Abraham. Even great man Moses. If you were to go to chapter 11, verse 26, you read something about Moses this way. Take a look. We will study that closely later on. But it says in verse 26, verse 25. I would begin with verse 24. Forgive me. Verse 24 onwards. By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the sons of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. You see that? He forsook Egypt. He forsook the treasures of Pharaoh by faith, because of the recompense of reward that God would give to him. We are pilgrims. We have no pleasure in the things of this world. I am more and more taught by the Spirit of God through the Word. The less I desire the things of this world, the better it is for my soul to think of God and the heaven He promised. The more I desire for the things of this world, I become more and more contented with this world, and I do not feel a sense of desperation to be with God. You know, I've been living in a 4-room flat. Allow me to share this testimony with you. For some time I thought about having a bigger house. I don't think it's a sinful thing to have a bigger house. But I realized if I have to achieve that, there are some very serious decisions I have to make with regard to my finances. And I cannot freely spend in the things of God as I do today, because I have to pay a bigger installment to the HDB for a bigger flat, because my salary is not increasing in great measure. And so if I have to take a bigger flat, I can probably manage it with the way things are today, but it will not free me in serving God. I become more committed to HDB than God's purposes. And I prayed very eagerly. I prayed sincerely in my personal devotion and family prayer that, Lord, you give us a bigger house if it is your will. I repeatedly prayed. And then I hear from my own children the Lord used them, saying to me that, Dad, this is okay, this is good. No need, this is a good place. So I said, why am I desperate? Yes, I have my reasons. Well, if my parents come, I can give them another room. If missionaries come, I can give them another room. Good reasons. But then I said, doesn't God know that? I didn't plead for this house. The Lord gave it to me in very strange way. Very difficult circumstances. When things were going against me, the gift came. Through adversity, He gave me this flat that I'm living in. And it's a miracle story. I don't have to relate it to you now because it's not the point. But I realized if I'm going to be so earthly minded, I will not press toward the goal that God has given. By buying an HDB, God will not give me a reward in heaven. But for sacrifices I make for the Lord's sake, I will have my reward. And I'm pretty happy with the small house. And sometimes my wife will remind me when we visit people with big house, oh, what a nice house, right? I say, yeah. Are you sad that I can't give you a bigger house? No, the Lord has given us a big mansion in heaven. So that's enough. So I say, thank God for a wife who has hope. If I have a wife who constantly, I married you, look, I have to live in this small house, then I have a problem. But she also comforts me by saying, if you have a bigger house, I have to mop a lot of more rooms. So that's fine. So she's happy as the way she is, so I'm much relieved. Please don't think I'm criticizing somebody who bought a new house. No, don't get me wrong. But I want you to have the right thinking in life. If God has, by His providence, restricted you in some areas, don't be bitter about it. There's nothing wrong about it. Come on, even if you live in a palace-like building, when death comes, where do you go? You still go into a 6-foot grave, isn't it? That's all. You're only good to stay in a 6-foot hole. That's all. So I thank God for the providence of God that cuts away my entanglement to this world. And I thank God for the diabetes that helped me not to eat too much ice cream. I'm looking forward to the fruit of the tree of life, where there is healing from all kinds of diseases, when I shall be free. Now I eat bitter gourd. But that tells me, look forward to heaven. I find a beautiful estrangement from the things of this world that gives me a constant desire to be with my Lord. And so we end with the last verse, verse 16. Estrangement means an attachment to celestial things. Estrangement from this world is an eternal attachment to the things above. But now they desire a better country. A better country. Amen. When you have better things, would you go for lesser things? When you have glorious things, will you go for feeble and weaker and meaner things? Of course not. We always go for better things. Strive for mastery, strive for excellence. And there is no greater excellence than the better country that's coming. Now, of course, I can preach another sermon on that. Why is heaven better? Jesus is there. Sin will never be there. Only saints, constant worship of God, eternal bliss, no sickness, no sorrow, no tears, no fighting, no quarrel. Eternal bliss. Have you ever heard of a country like that in this world? There is no place like this. We desire a better country that is heavenly. Not in this world, my friends. It's in heaven. So we thank God for the estrangement we feel with this world. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. Now that phrase at the end tells you the reward that God will give to those who have such a pilgrim's faith. What is it? God is not ashamed to be called their God. I love this. I love this. In my suffering, in my spiritual battle, in my way to heaven, if God would put his signboards along this path that I take, welcome my son, I'm your father, walk through here. If I see the providence of God in my road to heaven, saying that, welcome home, I'm your God, come on, walk with me, we are reaching home. Ah, what a wonderful thing. I lived in a very remote place in India when I was a child. My grandfather was a farmer, so in the night we walked through roads which have no street lights, absolutely no light at all. And in those days, these battery operated torches were few. And sometimes when the battery runs out, we have to walk a long distance to get the battery, so we don't bother. What we used to do is to get the coconut leaves or some shrubs together and set fire to it, and we make a torch out of it and we walk. We fan it like this, and then the fire will come and we can see the path. And that's how we walk. And sometimes I'm so scared, because I'm a little boy and I'm so scared at night to walk the long distance. But when my father or my grandfather would say, Das, walk, I'm here, walk forward, I'm so happy. Then he keep quiet. Then I'm scared. Then after a while when he say, son, walk forward, don't worry, walk, keep moving, I'm happy and I walk faster. Then after a while when no sound, I slow down. And then I want to hear the voice. I can't always turn back and see. I'm scared to turn back also. As long as I can hear his voice, I'm happy to go forward. It's quite a frightening journey to heaven, because we are strangers in this world. Many things frighten us. Many things make us sad. But God is happy to tell us, I'm your God. Keep moving. Keep moving. Blessed be his name. And when the journey comes to an end, he says, I have prepared a city for you. Come in. Many of us are quite frightened to die, right? Many times I ask this question, which one do you prefer? Rapture while you're alive, or die and then the rapture? Many say alive and be raptured. Don't want to die. Everyone is scared. But let me tell you, I certainly believe in my heart, though it is a dark valley of death, yet his presence, his promise somehow will remove the fear in those last moments of our life. God knows it. He promises. He promises. So if you are afraid of death, I have this to say. Don't worry about that moment. The Lord will be there to cheer your heart, to give you a full glimpse of that celestial city when you take the last breath. And he will make sure that last leap will be just fine with him around. And that's our hope.